All right, chapter 4, correct, Chris? I hope so, that's what I prepared. Chapter 4.
Yeah. No, I don't, no.
I read it too, so we'll start that.
Are you going?
Oh, yes, I forget about all that. Didn't have all that fancy
Some of us
stuff
are
where I
old,
was.
some of us are old and hard here.
Didn't have all that fancy stuff where I was.
Think somebody else could be on this trip.
I don't expect it. Didn't get any there, watch what that, get in here. A stump to stand on. All right. Nehemiah chapter 4. So we had talked about Ezra and Nehemiah being contemporaries, and we're going to see Ezra show up by name a little later on in the book. And as Ezra was looking at getting the temple built back, looking at getting the religious system and the different things that they were supposed to be doing, getting that back in order, and getting the people's lives and hearts back in order. Well, Nehemiah is more of a civil government guy. He's trying to get the physical government going, the physical town going. He's trying to get things where they need to be for their safety. So let's look at Nehemiah chapter 4. And you've already been introduced to Sanballat. And he finds out that they're building the wall, and the Bible says he becomes furious and indignant and mocked the Jews. You ever wondered, why did this make him so mad? Why in the world? You know, it's kind of like your neighbor down the road, and they're putting up a privacy fence, and you get all tore out of shape about it. Well, what most historians will say is that he felt like it was threatening his position, that they were going to become a powerful nation again if they were allowed to rebuild, and that if they did that, he might lose some of his footing in the area. So that's the idea there. So the first thing he does, you know, human nature really hasn't changed. The first thing he does is he tries to discourage them. Let's get somebody to read verse 2.
And he spake before his brethren, the army of Samaria, said, What do these people choose? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end of the day? Will they divide the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned?
So he begins taunting them. Don't you think about he has an audience. Bullies like audiences, don't they? And he's going to try to bully them into stopping the work. He calls them feeble Jews. Why, you're too weak. You're not capable. You can't do that. Will they restore it themselves? You can't do this by yourself. Well, you're going to find out a little bit later on that they're not doing this by themselves. But he's trying to use words and intimidation to stop what was going on. And then he kind of hits below the belt, folks. Will they sacrifice? And what he's saying there is, you've been unfaithful before, you'll be unfaithful again. You're going to fall just like you did before. You're not going to finish your spiritual walk. You're not going to finish this physical walk. You're going to fail. Yes, sir.
Physical work in his eyes is going to be sloppy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, I find it interesting, you used the term bully a
Mhm.
second ago. A couple of weeks ago, when we were going over chapter 2, and we're first introduced to what I call the villains of this particular story. That was one of the things that I talked about as a possibility. Why were Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, why were they so upset? Why did this bother them so much? A bully can only be a bully if he's gotten somebody to bully. And they've been picking on, for lack of a better term, the Jews, they were easy targets, and they were fast becoming not easy targets now.
That's exactly right. And they weren't worried about them when they come back. I mean, a whole lot less came back than what went over into captivity. And they're thinking, okay, well, you know, they'll scatter out or whatnot, and they're just not going to reform as a nation. But all of a sudden, wait a minute here. They're fortifying a city. Wait a minute, what's going on here? Will they finish it up in a day? Oh, it'll take too long. You'll run out of steam. You'll quit. You won't finish it. Sound familiar? That's the way the bully works. Will you dig them out of the heaps of rubbish, to burn stones? Now, there was a saying in Western Kentucky where I came from, and I don't know if that happens here. Have you ever heard anything about rebuilding on a foundation where a building's been burned? Is there any saying, anything like that around here? Well, share it with me, because I don't know if it's the same.
I've always heard you don't want to rebuild on a place that's been burnt back in because it was burned.
That's exactly right. Heard it all my life. You don't rebuild on the same foundation where something is burned, because it's subject to be burned again. Mom, how many times did Lacey School? Mom, Glennis, how many times did Lacey School burn? Twice or 3 times? How many times did Lacey School burn? 3? They built on the same foundation each time. I don't really think there's any physical evidence that you would be able to apply to that, but I think folks have noticed that over the years, and it just became a saying. And you got to understand, probably when that happened, they were dealing with open fires or stoves that were wood burning when all this happened. And what happens if you don't clean your chimney, or you allow creosote or things like that to build up? It catches on fire. So it probably was more along the lines of that rather than it actually being the same foundation and that having something to do with it. There is another thing, though. According to how hot it gets, but concrete doesn't burn, but that mortar between those joints, if it gets hot enough, it becomes weak. And you'll need to get rid of the block. You can go back to the concrete foundation, but you'll need to get rid of the block, because if it gets hot enough, it becomes powdery and weak. Somehow it pulls the calcium out of the mortar. which makes it very brittle and it starts falling out between the block, and then you don't have it stuck together. Say again? Yeah, according to how hot it got, absolutely. So basically he's saying, you're trying to rebuild the wall out of junk. All these old burned stones. You're taking it out of a rubble pile. Well, y'all are just pitiful. Well, that didn't work, did it? So he had a buddy that pipes up. Verse 3. Somebody read verse 3. Tobiah.
Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they build, the thoughts of the Lord shall break down and stone.
That would be an idiom or a saying that they would use. If a fox jumps up on the wall, it'll knock it down. Do we use any things like that today, to any type of idioms to say something's not very strong or it won't last? Hard wind will blow it over. What else? That's the only one? I've heard this said about tractors. Well, that thing wouldn't pull a sitting hen off of the nest. They are sayings that are used to be insulting, to be degrading, to try to get someone to feel a certain way. And the whole idea behind all this is we got to get them to quit building that wall. We don't want them to fortify. We don't want them to unify, is what he's saying. So he literally is saying, well, if a fox jumps up on that wall, it'll fall down. And I can hear them laughing, and you can too, because that's what comes along with it. Well, it's just not going to stand. It's not going to last. But it did. Now, this particular wall is not as grandiose, and it probably doesn't encompass the amount of actual acreage that the original wall around Jerusalem would have covered. So it's a little bit smaller, and we'll talk about how big it is. It's still a big undertaking. But they don't want them to build it all, because what they're seeing is, wait a minute, they've unified and they've got the temple. They're making sacrifices. They're worshiping God the way they're supposed to. They put away foreign wives. They sent folks away that was trying to tear them away from their God. And now they're building their city back up. We better keep an eye on these guys. They're up and coming. And before we know it, rather than us being the rulers of the territory and them being folks who have come back, we're going to be the ones that are the ones that look like they're a visitor or sojourner, and they're going to rise to power. So they don't want that to happen. You know, I thought about this as they were talking to them, and I thought about some things that and I hope you will share, that have been built over the years that folks have had something to say about. In 1173, the Tower of Pisa was